بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي صدق الله العظيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. So today I'm going to be looking at Surah Al-Hajj, Ayah number 37. And I want to just quickly read the Ayah, Inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لن ينال الله لحومها ولا دماؤها ولكن يناله التقوى منكم كذلك سخرها لكم لتكبروا الله على ما هداكم وبشر المحسنين. صدق الله العظيم. Surah Al-Fajr, Ayah number 37, translates, their meat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaking, their meat will not reach Allah, nor will their blood, but what reaches Him is piety from you. Thus have we subjected them to you that you may glorify Allah for that to which He has guided you and give good tidings to the doers of good. So just to give you a brief background about this. Now, this surah, this particular ayah, is concerning the zabah, the qurbani, the sacrifice that we give as those who go on Hajj or those who don't, and it is something just done every year in the month of Thul Hijjah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking about this qurbani, this sacrifice, and He's talking about its physical aspect. So He's saying their meat will not reach Allah, nor will their blood, but what does reach Him is the piety from you. So that's what is meant by the meat and the blood, meaning the animal that is sacrificed. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, it is that's not for me, you know, the blood and the meat, etc. You have that, you eat from that animal, and I don't have that. So this is something from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this is something which is given to us as a means for us to show gratitude to Him and also to show our obedience to Him. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not asking for, as happens and has happened traditionally in other religions and other ways of worshipping deities, that food and drink is made and it is then given to the temples of the gods, and it is assumed that the gods will come and consume that food, whereas in actual fact it is usually the priests in the temples that would have come and had that food. But the people are led to believe that the gods themselves have come and they have had that food, and so the people, they increase in their belief in that particular faith. So this is how things were done in the past. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here is giving that clarity, showing again that distinction in Islam, that Allah ta'ala is saying clearly that I'm not going to have any part of this, the animal, and it's not going to come to me. I'm not going to have this meat. It's like you have it. So it's very common sense. You slaughter the animal. It's in front of you. You eat it, right? It's a very commonsensical and a very rational response. So that's the first thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving in this ayah, is that rationality, that when you do that qurbani, unlike, and that distinction between other faiths, that we do not have that the animal that's slaughtered is given to the gods and the gods eat it and so on. It doesn't happen like that. That is not the rationale of Islam. So what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then goes on to say is about righteousness, taqwa. So I'll explain that as we go on, inshallah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, what reaches Him is your taqwa, your piety. Thus have we subjected them to you, meaning the animals. The animals for slaughter are what we call docile animals. They're not carnivorous, they're not ferocious, they're not the kind of animals that are what we might call wild animals, dangerous animals like a lion or a bear or something like that. No, they're docile animals such as a camel, a sheep, a goat, a cow, an animal like that will not fight back, that has no such diet or no such mentality as that would of a carnivorous animal. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says we have subjected them to you. They are subject to us. They are subservient to us. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues to say that which He has guided you to, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hidayah. And His hidayah is that we have been guided to Islam, we have been guided to righteousness, we have been guided to understand what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is evil, what is rational, what is irrational. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, give good tidings to the doers of good. And that's those people who have understood this rationale, become a part of Islam, become a part of the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and have become righteously guided, and they then continue in their lives to do righteousness, goodness, because of understanding the rationale of Islam, that we have a judgment day, we have a creator, we have an accountability, and we have a duty to the rest of mankind, and not just to the rest of mankind, but to animal kind, to the planet, to the environment, etc. So righteousness for them is everything good and beneficial to the environment and the society around you. That's a good person. So this ayah, just in brief, this is the sort of things it's alluding to. So let's have a look at this in more detail, inshallah. So the sacrifice of animals is a very high form of worship. But as I mentioned here, this ayah clarifies that their meat and blood do not reach Allah Ta'ala. So what does reach Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala is this commitment towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this devotion to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And by doing that, we are making this sacrifice and consuming the food, the meat, etc. ourselves. What is left is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is interested in. And it is just that, it's our piety, our righteousness, which is shown by our devotion to do such a thing. So this rule now applies to all forms of worship, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives a command that this is the worship I want, or that is the worship I want, and the believer is the one who applies himself or herself to that ibadah. So let's take salah, for example. Salah is a form of worship, and a believer is one who applies himself because he or she has been given that hukum, that command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that I want you to make salah. So in the same manner is zakah. In the same manner is the actual overall action of Hajj, the fasting in Ramadan, and the paying of the zakah. So all of these are actions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has required of us. But at the same time, just as the sacrifice of the animal and the meat and the blood does not reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the same manner, the salah, the zakah, the Hajj, the fasting, the ritualistic or physical actions, they don't reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Those are things for us to do. Those are things for us to do. But what reaches Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, for example, in the salah, it's the khushu. It's that consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's that devotion to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that reaches Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in our salah, that makes our salah acceptable or not. In the zakah, it is that devotion again, that concern for fellow mankind, that there are people who are poor and they need something of which what I have, and so I will give this a percentage, this 2.5%, that others may have something when they have nothing. So that is that show of love and concern through the belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for fellow mankind that reaches Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In the case of fasting, it's not the physical aspects of the suhoor or the iftar or the remaining away from physical food and the things that break the fast during the day, sexual intercourse and eating itself, these things. It's not that. Those are the physical things that we are given to maintain our duty and our routine of the fast. What reaches Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the taqwa, is the piety to refrain from those things and to maintain the fast and to begin and end the fast appropriately. It is that devotion and that development of that devotion that reaches Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Same with the Hajj, all the different actions of Hajj, be it the stoning, be it the running from Mina, Safa and Marwa, be it the du'as that were made at the end on Yom al-Arafah. All of these things are the physical, ritualistic parts. What reaches Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is again our commitment, our devotion. That is what reaches Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in all of these actions. So by telling us about the sacrifice and saying the blood and the flesh do not reach me, not only is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clarifying Islam from and making it distinct from all other faiths that have these sorts of things in there, that believe that their gods take from that sacrifice, but also it shows us that not only in the sacrifice, but in all aspects of ibadah, the physical outward aspects are for us to physically perform, but it's the inner aspect that reaches Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And indeed, it is upon those inner aspects that that particular form of ibadah will be acceptable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or not. He's not concerned about the physical aspects. The real purpose then of these rites of worship is to obey the commands of Allah Ta'ala with all sincerity, without which these rites of worship are like a body without soul. So the next issue that comes in is obedience. Obedience to the commands of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. And a believer is one who has that without question. If Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala has commanded something, there is complete obedience. In fact, the extent that the person of righteousness will take those things that Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala has recommended and take those and bring obedience into those too, just as much as he or she would with the acts that are commanded. So this is extra devotion. And the greater the depth of piety, righteousness, taqwa in a person, the more he or she will take not just the commands. The commands it's a foregone conclusion, but he or she will take even the recommendations and even the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala advises to do or not to do. And they will take those and act upon them as if they were commands. They will devote themselves to those actions as if they were commands. Hence, we find people of righteousness, the higher up you go, up to the level of prophets, and they will take a salah such as the Hajj, which is not commanded, and they will pray that as if it's one of the commanded salah. They will go to the fasting outside of Ramadan, and they will take that as if it's commanded, and they will religiously and devotedly and obediently make fasts upon days in the week or in the middle of the month, etc., outside of Ramadan. They will take to Umrah as something that is devoting and obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they will go with devotion and show their devotion in Umrah as much as they would in Hajj. They will go to Zakah and beyond Zakah, Limla and Sadaqah, and they will give whenever they can and wherever they can and however they can. Even a little bit. If they have something, they will give so that their fellow human being has something, and look at it as if it was a command, like the command of Zakat. So this is where those people have taken the internal aspect of these acts of worship with that sincerity and brought that taqwa to a high level, so that they go beyond the things that are commanded to the things that are recommended and treat those as if they are commanded because of their love and devotion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, having said that, nevertheless, these forms of worship are also very important because Allah Ta'ala has prescribed they develop obedience. So, if a person is physically doing something, he or she doesn't understand it. All they know is this is something that is commanded by Allah. So they do it simply because of that, and there's no other understanding of it, its details, its intricacies, etc. That is sufficient. That is sufficient. And sometimes that is all we need, because as human beings, we're made up of the nafs. And the nafs and the spirit, the ruh, are the two components of our existence. And that nafs, the body, requires physical instruction or physical practice, physical routine. And if it has that physical routine, it will get into a used form. It will become used to it. And then it will keep it away from doing things which are evil. They say that, in the West, that the devil makes things for idle hands, makes things to do for idle hands. So, meaning that if you've got nothing to do, Shaitan will give you something to do. Shaitan will give you something to do. So, if you just do what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you to do, you will have no time left for your hands to be idle to do something wrong. So, this is, if you like, a sort of an example, a basic principle. So, as to why we do the physical routine. 5 times a day. We're repeating, standing, bowing, sajda, etc. 5 times a day, over and over, even in the different rakats of each one single salah. We're repeating particular routines. We're repeating particular routines when we go to Hajj, particular routines in fasting, particular routines in the zakah even, that we do things which are physical, which allows our body to get used to it. And through that use to it, through that routine, we start to develop ourselves, and the inner part starts to develop. This is for a person who doesn't have that inner part. The person of taqwa approaches the physical acts with that inner part intact to begin with. And those physical outer practices start to develop further and actually are motivated by their inner aspect, which is their love, their devotion, their taqwa. However, a person who doesn't have that understanding and doesn't have that taqwa must still do the physical because it will develop the internal. That's why in Islam, the scholars always require and recommend that a person who says, when I pray, I don't feel it. The scholars don't say, okay, leave it until you do, because this is not good. Even though the person himself might say, he or she might say, well, look, I feel hypocritical. Look, I'm praying, but I don't feel anything, and I'm thinking of other things, and I'm not supposed to be doing that, but I'm just doing it because everybody else is telling me, and I'm just doing it because I'm supposed to do it, but I just don't understand it. The scholars will still say, no, you still do it. You still do it. Why? Because there's a wisdom in that. Because if you still do it, there's an act of obedience occurring in that, which is rewardable. That you're still praying, you're still going through the motions. And if the feeling is not there at one time, perhaps over time it will come. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you the tawfiq. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will observe and watch that you are committing the physical act over and over and over again to Him, knowing full well that you do not understand it, knowing full well that you do not see the logic in it or the intellect in it, knowing full well that you do not have focus in it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you all of those things because He sees the devotion to the most basic aspect is in place. But if that basic aspect is not in place, then there is no room for growth. There is no seeds that are being sown. Nothing will blossom from that at all. So the scholars say, if you don't feel anything, still continue to pray. If you don't feel anything, still continue to fast, and so on and so on. This is important because it allows, the routine allows us to develop. And so with the person of taqwa now, she also can take benefit of the routine because he or she, they already have their taqwa, but they will use the routine to get themselves into a particular flow of life, a particular pattern of life. And they will develop meaning from that. And that will increase them in their taqwa. So subhanAllah, it is very beautifully worked out that even the routine is useful. Even that routine has benefits. And at the very least, it prevents us from doing other things which will be wrong whilst we're engaged in doing something which is right. So, lessons for us from this ayah and its understanding is that, first of all, remaining obedient without understanding may be sufficient for the simple-minded. And many people were like this. At the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there were many people who were in this state. They were slaves, or they were ignorant of things, or they were simple-minded, or they were Bedouin, and they had simple minds. And so all they wanted was simple things. There's a very classic hadith where a Bedouin came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and asked, Ya Rasulullah, I know, I have heard of many different things that are in Islam. It is very comprehensive, very encompassing, mashallah. However, he wanted and he asked for something simple. Give me something. So I'm a simple man. I want something simple. Give me what I simply need to do. So Rasulullah said that you testify that there is no God but Allah and that I am the messenger of Allah. And he said, okay, I can do that. He said, further to that, Rasulullah said, then you pray. He said, what kind of prayer do I do? He said, there are 5 prayers. And if you complete these 5 prayers, there are 5 farad. And this is to some extent also eliminating the sunnah and the nawafil. But just the farad of Fajr, Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, Isha, just that is one understanding of this hadith. So the man says, is there anything more than that? And Rasulullah said, yes, there are nawafil salah, for example, tahajjud and so on. And he said, no, I will just do this. Is there anything more I have to do? And Rasulullah said, there's fasting in Ramadan. Is there any fasting beyond that? Rasulullah said, yes, there is. But this is the main fast. Then he says, is there any other hukum, any other command? And Rasulullah said, Hajj and Zakat. And the man again asked in each case, is there more beyond Zakat? Yes, there is Sadaqah Lillah. Is there more beyond Hajj? Yes, there is Umrah. So the man, after hearing all of this, thinks about it and comes to his conclusion. And he says, I will only do the 5 salah, Hajj once in my life, as and when I'm able to, fast only in Ramadan, and pay only my Zakat. Nothing more. No Sadaqah Lillah. And he said, I will remain upon this. He stood up and went away. Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, if that man does exactly what he's just said, he will succeed. He will go to Jannah. He will succeed. Then he's asking for just a basic minimum, and he's actually not willing to go beyond that, and he will just focus upon that. But that is sufficient for him. And this is the thing that we're being taught here, that if you remain even with the basics, then that is enough for you if you are sincere in that. Further to the act of obedience to Allah Ta'ala is the issue of what motivates that obedience. So now we go deeper. Now we go further to the basic routine and ritual. And here we need to look at what is it that motivates a person into obedience? What is it that motivates a person into obedience? Now, acts of obedience can be based upon many factors, which are not from a willing soul. So a person can act in obedience because they are forced, because they are blackmailed, because they're emotionally coerced to do so, because of some threat, because of some reward even. But in all of these cases, it may be something that person he or she would never do in their life other than this. Had it not been for this particular factor, they would not have done that particular practice. Yet they are doing it diligently, but it is not from what is called a willing soul. So the willing soul is one that has recognized the greatness of Allah Ta'ala and submitted in gratitude, awe, and sincerity. He or she has recognized the greatness of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, coming first and foremost is from the knowledge of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, and that coming from the lessons on Tawheed, to understand Tawheed, and then further from that, the pillars of Iman, and so on. So first and foremost, coming from knowledge, and secondly, from practice, and thirdly, as a result of practice, the experience of those aspects of the deen. What that leads to is shukr, gratitude. The person understands what he or she has been created by and why, and the purpose of life, and the blessings in life. And so he or she is in a state of abject gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for all that they have. They now understand, they now realize their position, their reality with respect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then they are in awe of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because of the power, the limitless, infinite ability of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala over them. That they look at creation and they are fascinated, they are amazed by it. That even the smallest of things, a blade of grass, is so complex when taken under the microscope, that they're in abject awe of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And these two things inculcate in the person sincerity, ikhlas, because there is nothing that impresses them more now than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Allah's qudra, His ability. Nothing can impress them, no matter how great and wonderful it is within the relativity of human beings and our capabilities. Nothing matches to the greatness, the infinite greatness, the unending greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in that, the gratitude, the awe, and the sincerity is inculcated. So looking at this sincerity, I want to have a brief look at this hadith, inshallah, which takes us to the next step of understanding this particular ayah. قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من قال لا إله إلا الله مخلصا دخل الجنة. صدق رسول الله. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, whoever says there is no God but Allah sincerely, he will be admitted into Jannah. Now, there's a brief story behind this because the hadith doesn't convey that. The hadith was initially, whoever says there is no God but Allah, he will be admitted into Jannah, missing the specific word sincerely. So this was something Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu. And Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu was so overjoyed with this, he wanted to go out and give this bushra, this good news, to the rest of the Salaf. So he went out and he started telling people that if you commit yourself to La ilaha illallah, if you say La ilaha illallah, meaning in that term obviously meant that not just literally saying it and making adhkar of it, but in terms of understanding it and committing to it, he said, whoever does this, you will enter Jannah. So he's going around telling people this, and he comes across Umar Farooq radiallahu anhu, who was a very discerning person. So Umar Farooq radiallahu anhu, when he hears him say this, he disagreed. He said, what are you saying? You're making it so easy for people because people just literally say, La ilaha illallah, I come into Islam, take the Shahada, but they won't be sincere about it. And this is not good, this is not correct. I don't agree with this. Are you sure this is what, you have been told by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? He said, yes. So Umar Farooq radiallahu anhu said, show me proof. Take me to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and say this in front of him and confirm it. So they went back to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the question was put before our Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu repeated that, Ya Rasulullah, you told me that whoever says La ilaha illallah, he will enter Jannah. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam confirmed it, but he then asked, Ya Umar, what is your contention with this? So Umar Farooq radiallahu anhu made that point known. He said, Ya Rasulullah, it's too easy. People who are not committed, who are not genuine, they will say all this and they will think that they've got it made. And it will make things too easy. And people will take advantage. So he continued with this argument, this rationale. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam reworded it, or rather added one word. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam repeated, whoever says there is no God but Allah sincerely, he will be admitted into Jannah. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam asked, Ya Umar, are you satisfied now? And Umar Farooq radiallahu anhu said, yes, Ya Rasulullah, I am now satisfied with this statement. So that was the background behind this hadith. And now we understand that emphasis of Umar Farooq radiallahu anhu becomes the main theme of this hadith. Sincerity is the basis of acceptance of our deeds. Sincerity is the basis of acceptance of our deeds. Without that sincerity, whatever deeds we do, no matter how numerous, how often, how regular, how committed, if the ikhlas is not there, then this hadith teaches us that that deed is not of the quality that Allah Ta'ala would accept it. He may accept it on the basis of his rahmah, but it will not be accepted on the basis of the strength of the deed itself. It does not have strength, it does not have substance, because it lacks sincerity. So sincerity is that which it motivates a person to do however much or whatever little he or she can do for the sake of Allah Ta'ala, regardless of others. This is the idea of ikhlas, of sincerity. The person who is mukhlis is a person who will do whatever they can, however much or whatever little. And it's understood that it can be embarrassing when you can only do very little. When you can do only very little, it can be embarrassing in front of people. But there are times when a lot can be embarrassing as well. A person who does a lot, he can also be embarrassed that because other people aren't doing the same amount, and he or she can be embarrassed that they're doing that much, and it's embarrassing that they're being highlighted or pointed out, or everybody's giving them that attention. That can be an embarrassment as well. However, the person of ikhlas, sincerity, in either case, is not perturbed. That person is not moved. He or she is doing it for the sake of Allah Ta'ala, and their sincerity is towards Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. So whatever are the circumstances, whatever is the environment, they will commit themselves to doing that deed in great or small quantity, regardless of what is said or done by those around. So in effect, their deeds are done without show or need for approval, in isolated places or the depths of the night, for Allah Ta'ala is the only witness they seek. So whatever deeds they do, firstly, it will be the same in quantity, quality, and action if they did it with no one watching or if they did it with a large audience watching. There will be no change in the way they perform that deed. Whatever it is, salah, fasting, reciting Quran, whatever it is, there will be no change. They will not feel any need that now they're not reciting Quran in the depths of the night, but they're in front of an audience, and so they need to put on an extra special voice or an extra tone in their tajweed or recitation. They will not think that now that they're praying in front of people that they need to do extra actions or show extra focus in their movements and so on. No, they will still do the same as if they're being watched, as if they're not being watched. That will not change. Why? Because they seek the approval. They seek the approval of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, not the people. That is ikhlas. That is sincerity. And a person who is mukhlis, this is one of their defining characteristics, that the deeds that they do are irrelevant of their circumstances. Whatever they do in the depths of the night, whatever they do alone, without anybody watching, however they perform any acts of ibadah there, will not change when it comes out into the public domain. And this is something which only the person himself or herself will know. Everyone, he or she will know, am I doing this differently to the way I was doing it this last night when nobody was watching? Am I reciting the Quran in the same way, or am I adding something to it? Am I praying in the same way as I did last night when nobody's watching, or am I adding something to it because now I can see people around me, I can hear or see people? This is the state of that person. And only he or she will know this, because the people who have not seen him or her in the depths of the night obviously will not be able to judge. They will only see what they will see in their presence. But the person who's doing it, he or she will know. And this is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's judgment becomes very pertinent to them. So a person who has ikhlas, sincerity, will not change that. They will remain the same. And because it's a personal thing between that person and Allah ta'ala, it is not for other people to know. Other people are not to blame. That person is to blame. That person is the one Allah ta'ala takes into account, and that person on Yawm al-Hisab will be the one who will be done for riyah, for showing off, or will be rewarded for his ikhlas or her ikhlas. The next thing I want to look at is another aspect of this ayah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لن ينال الله لحومها ولا دماؤها ولكن يناله التقوى منكم كذلك سخر لها لكم لتكبروا الله على ما هداكم وبشر المحسنين صدق الله العظيم. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, their meat will not reach Allah, nor will their blood, but what reaches them is piety from you. Thus have we subjected them to you, that you may glorify Allah ta'ala. For that to which He has guided you, and give good tidings to the doers of good. Now, what I want to look at is, thus we have subjected them to you, that you may glorify Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That you may glorify Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, apart from the actual sacrifice itself of the blood and meat, the lesson that in this ayah, the second lesson in this ayah, is that of the measure of taqwa. So, bearing these two things in mind, the glorifying of Allah Ta'ala and the qurbani itself, the sacrifice itself. Okay, so the second lesson in this ayah is that of the sacrifice, which is the measure of our taqwa. Now, in terms of the animal, it should be an emotional sacrifice. So, what I mean by that is, traditionally, and in some places of the world, it still is done, but traditionally, and the true sunnah of sacrificing an animal was that you had the animal from birth. So that animal from birth was an animal that you raised, just as we do pets today. You raise that animal, and you, as is naturally human beings, we develop attachments. We develop attachments between human beings, and we develop attachments to animals. So if that animal is growing up under your care, and you're feeding it and caring for it, etc., whether it's a lamb, sheep, goat, whatever, in some places, they actually name them as well. So it becomes like a part of the family. And in many of these places in the world, especially hundreds of years ago, when much of the life of the earth was like this, especially at the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the animals were like part of the family. So then when it came to qurbani and you sacrificed the animal, you had named it, you had loved it, you had cared for it, etc. It truly was an emotional sacrifice. So the sacrifice was given, I mean, the word sacrifice itself literally means something you give which you don't want to, which is going to cause you some pain. It's going to cause you some difficulty. It's a challenge at the very least. That's a sacrifice. That's why people say, well, I sacrificed my time or my effort to do this. It cost me this, it cost me that. Because it was a sacrifice, meaning I gave up something which I wanted to do in order to do this other thing for somebody else. That is seen as a sacrifice. So in the same sense is this. Whereas today, a lot of people, they sacrifice simply to click on something on a computer and have a sacrifice sent. The money sent for an animal to be sacrificed somewhere in the world for some people in the world that you never met. This was not the way of the sunnah. The sunnah was that you got the animal, you grew it, you loved it, you sacrificed it, and then you gave its meat to the poor people in their hands. That was the actual benefit. And all of this was emotional. Now, what does that sacrifice, that qurbani, mean in terms of the rest of our lives, in terms of our commitment to Allah Ta'ala? What are we willing to sacrifice is the question. If we look at the origins, Ibrahim was asked to sacrifice his son. Now, he didn't know that that wasn't the actual event. In his dream, he saw himself with the knife and about to cut the throat of Ismail alayhi salam. So he goes and does that. But when he does that, Allah Ta'ala stops him at that point and says, you have fulfilled the dream. This is all you saw. You saw yourself with the son lying down and the knife in your hand. That's all. You did not see him being cut open. So you have done what you have done. Now take the ram from Jannah and give the sacrifice of that. Fulfill the actual act of sacrifice with the ram. So what happens here is that Ibrahim is showing he was willing to give what he loved. And all Allah Ta'ala wants to know is that, are you willing to give what you love? Many times Allah Ta'ala may not take it. All he's looking at is our commitment. So what are we willing to sacrifice? Are we willing to sacrifice our money? Are we willing to sacrifice our time? Are we willing to sacrifice our skills for other people, to help one another, to give to one another? Are we willing to do that or not? That is what Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala is looking for in this. Then there is the greater sacrifice of patience and forgiveness as well. That is a greater sacrifice. And that greater sacrifice is, are we willing to overcome, to forego our feelings, our anger, our hatred even, our pain over someone else when they seek our forgiveness? Are we willing to do that? Then the Qurbani of Hajj has become meaningful for us. We have understood it. But otherwise we haven't. It remains an animal which we have just sacrificed and given away without any feelings. No, the deeper issue here is, are we willing to commit a sacrifice within ourselves that is difficult for us in terms of improving the life of others around us? And one of those things is patience, and another is forgiveness. And we often are not willing to do that. That sacrifice is where the deeper people, the people of taqwa, reside. That the sacrifice of patience, when you can cause harm to someone, when you can be authoritative over somebody, or you can give commands to somebody, or you can put a stop to something, and you don't. You deal with it patiently. You be patient over it. You don't commit zulm, or you forgive. Someone's wronged you. Someone's done something, upset you, angered you, hurt you, insulted you, demeaned you, but you're willing to forgive. That sacrifice is what Allah Ta'ala is looking for. That sacrifice means you have understood the idea of sacrifice for this, the days of Thul Hijjah and Hajj. The third lesson in this ayah is that of the takbir, as I said. And the sunnah is to state the actual takbirah throughout the 10 days and the 3 days of Tashreek. You start from the first day of Thul Hijjah and carry on all the way through. Although what we actually do is on the Yawm al-Arafah, the day of Yawm al-Arafah, we start from the Fajr and then continue from the days of Tashreek. But in actual fact, the other sunnah, that is one sunnah, but the other sunnah is where the Salaf used to actually do the Tashreek all through the 10 days. And they would continue that. And this idea, the statement of Allahu Akbar, has great power within it. The very literal word Allahu Akbar, Allah is the greatest. This statement has great power within it. And many times Muslims have done many great things by just stating this over and over. And if you look at, for example, the Salah, every motion, every movement we make, we say Allahu Akbar, then we make the movement, showing that Allah gives us tawfiq to move, to do. So in the same sense, this takbir being said over these days is empowering if we understand it. Further to that, even in the Akhirah, it is known towards the Akhirah Zaman, Constantinople, Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, will be conquered with just the words of takbir. The Muslim army will come to Constantinople and they will just recite the takbir and they will conquer this whole city of Constantinople. The walls that will be defending it will collapse, and because of the power of Allahu Akbar. So it's actually a good thing to continue even after the days of Thul Hijjah, to make conscious efforts to remember the takbirat and recite as often as possible, even beyond the days of Tashreek, to sense its greatness with Allah Ta'ala. To continue to say that, even when a person is down, feeling sad, feeling depressed, just to start saying Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, and you'll see, inshallah, the power of Allahu Akbar, the takbir, or La ilaha illallah, Wallahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, wa lillahi alhamd, or Subhanallah, or Alhamdulillah. All of these, the different kinds of takbirat, if you recite them, even when you're down, you'll feel them empowering you, inshallah. This is the spiritual power of the takbirat, which is said throughout these days and can be said beyond these days as a matter of practice in these days, and then we take it out and we say it when we feel it. Then inshallah we will benefit from this too. So this is some of the lessons from this particular ayah that is relevant to the days of Dhul Hijjah, inshallah. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.